My parents are only rich because of my grandfather and my grandmother. So, my dad gets jealous because, well, he's saying he's not getting enough money from her. So what does he do? He devises a plan to get her put in an old person's home so he can take all her money. However, I figured out his plan and I'm going to put a stop to it.
This is a complicated story, and I'll try and make sense as much as I can, but I need advice and I have no one to ask, as my family's all involved in this in some way. I have a very small family, and although we have extended family, I'm not close to any of them, and I'm not sure who amongst them I can even trust. To be honest, I think they're all as bad as each other. I'll set this all out, and maybe someone can give me some advice because I'm truly out of my depth right now. I should probably introduce the main characters in this. I'm 25 and male, and I'm a single child. I've been raised in what can be only described as luxury. My family is rich as hell. There's no other way to put it. I'm not gloating or trying to sound better than anybody, but there's no point in me being fully truthful, as that sort of defeats the point of this. I can't get advice if I leave the important information out. My parents, Marcus and Helena, are what you would call socialites, I suppose. Neither of them has worked a day in their lives, and they would be lost without their PAs, maid services, and personal cooks. Sometimes my house feels like a hotel as there's more staff than actual family members in the whole building. My grandmother, Gwen, 74, female, is my closest family member and probably, although it is hard to admit, my best friend, as I have no real friends my own age. I've spent a lot of my life staying with her when my parents were away on holidays or had friends staying, and she's actually more of a mother to me than my own mom. My grandpa, well, he came from a very rich family, with money that goes back to a time when it's easy to get very rich by abusing others. My grandmother called it profiting in misery, and although we have a lot of money ourselves, my grandparents set up a huge number of charity organizations and scholarship funds to give back to society. I think you may have already worked out what I'm about to say about my parents. They give nothing back at all, and I mean nothing, and if they had their way, all these charitable organizations would be stopped. My dad likes to say that if you give money to people for nothing, then they will never get out of the gutter and just expect more. Well, my dad worked so hard for his money, though. He really does not see that he is rich just because he was lucky to be my grandparents' child. He thinks he earned it somehow. I don't think like him, and sometimes I feel embarrassed when the people who work for us are expected to treat us as someone, somehow better than they are. It's awful, and I hate it. I hate having a chauffeur and not having to clean my own room like a normal person. I get many people would love that, but I have never had to do anything for myself in my entire life. At my grandparents', I was able to have a more normal childhood, but it would never be average. I was homeschooled as we were never in the country for long periods of time, so there was no point in me settling into any school as I would be dragged off to head off to Europe or somewhere exotic. We have houses in south of France and one in Italy. I actually love those, and if I could move there full time without my parents, it would be heaven. As I've gotten older, I have had more control over my life, but I do not fit into their way of living. I hate their parties, I hate their friends, and I hate the shallowness that is their life. I just want so much more. I did go to university where I was known as the rich kid, and I had maybe one or two close friends other than my best friend Max, and the rest were hangers who thought I would get them invited into the best parties or a trip to Europe. I could have, but I didn't. They were all shallow as heck, and shallow as my parents were. To be honest, they were the type of kids that I think my parents wish they had instead of me. I am, in their eyes, a failure, as I wanted more than holidays, parties, and important friends who were not real friends. After university, my grandmother encouraged Max and me to take some time to travel, and we did a 2-year trip which was amazing. For 2 years, I did not have to think about my parents or make sure I was nice to the right people, and it was bliss. I was almost disappointed to come home, but Max had a job waiting, and I did not want to travel alone. Also, I miss my grandmother. Even though we had talked almost daily when I was away, she encouraged me to keep a travel log and a journal, as I love writing and thinking about maybe writing a book. When I got back only 6 months ago, things were much different. At first, I could not put my finger on things how much they have changed, but there seemed to be a strain between my parents and my grandmother. I asked them what was going on, but everybody just brushed me off. I noticed that my dad did not seem to visit grandmother much, and in the past, he would always be there complaining that his funds were low, or that some person or the other had insulted him. My grandmother seemed not older, really, but tired, as though life was weighing her down. I was determined to find out what was going on. I arranged to have lunch with my parents and Max so that I had a witness, and I thought that I'd be able to draw the conversation around to things that I missed whilst I was away. It turns out that I did not even need to pry because my parents just loved nothing more than to talk about themselves. What I learned over lunch was that my grandmother had been cracking down on some of their extravagances. She felt that they were getting out of hand, and although there was plenty of money, she felt that things were just spending on stuff that's ridiculously frivolous. And it was about time her son and his wife began to do something other than party and go on holidays. My father looked like he was going to be physically throwing up when he said that my grandmother had suggested that he got more involved with the charities on a day-to-day basis and see for himself, well, just how privileged we really were. To me, that sounded like a great idea. I had been helping out with them since I was a teenager and really enjoyed it. Max was about to start work with one of the charities that worked in school as a teacher, which is what he did at university. Max does not have a family as such, and my grandmother sort of adopted him into the family, which, by the way, my parents were not happy about. They treat him like an employee, which I suppose he is, but he's much more than that to me. One day, I will tell them that they will have to get used to treating him as my husband, but that's a battle for another day. I've been careful about being obvious that we're a couple, and so far only my grandmother knows, and she's ecstatically happy for the both of us. I said that I actually understood what my grandmother was saying, as it does not look great when people are struggling to feed their children. We're throwing extravagant parties every night. I'd not really looked at things since I got back, and I was living more with my grandmother as she knew about Max, and we could be together easier there. My mom actually laughed when I said that and asked how it was her fault that people were not working hard enough to get money for their kids. Maybe. She said they should not have phones and their nails done if they're so poor. I wish I was brave enough to point out that until she married my father, she would not have been rich either. But I was not that brave. My dad was ranting a lot about not being able to access as much money as he felt he was entitled to, and it was hard to work out what was pushing him over the edge, as he had always been on restricted funds. Obviously, restriction for him would be a fortune to most people. Then he said it. The reason he was angry was he wanted a private plane, so he did not have to use the main airlines for holidays. And my grandmother had said absolutely no way. Not a chance. Not happening. I mean, why would we need one? We're all capable of going to an airport and getting on a plane. We fly first class, so we're not slumming it, as my dad implied. We have a boat, because he wanted one for the holidays, and my grandfather bought the boat, because he liked to go sea fishing with me, which I miss a lot. Anyways, the entire lunch turned out to be my parents just arguing about how they were being forced to live like poor people while sitting there in designer clothing, dripping with expensive jewelry in the most expensive restaurant in the area. You know, like poor people. They are so out of touch, it's embarrassing. I think my father realized that I was not siding with him, and he got angry and was clicking his fingers at the waiter for the bill, and said to me,
You're either with me or against me. Talk to your grandmother, and make that silly old bat see some sense, or you'll both regret it.
With that, they stormed out of the restaurant, well, stumbled, in my mom's case, because she can't walk in hills, and left. Max smiled and patted my hand and said,
They never said a word to me. Did you notice?
He does not let them get to him at all, but over coffee, we decided that we needed to find out what my dad meant and speak to my grandmother. Would I be wrong to go against my dad, even if it means starting a family war that might get nasty? Where would you start to try and find out what he is planning? Should I be worried, or is this just all bluster from a spoiled rich man child? I don't know what to do, so any advice from people with experience in legal stuff or anything like that would be amazing. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Looks like we got ourselves involved into a family drama. There's 2 updates for today's story, and if you think things got crazy so far, you have seen nothing yet. The best way to support the channel is by subscribing, so if you want more daily videos, click that subscribe button right underneath this video. And let's jump into the update. Okay. That did not go how I hoped. There was a lot of, oh, poor little rich boy is worried about his money pile disappearing comments, which I suppose is fair, but completely untrue. The poor little rich boy is worried that his stupid, greedy father is going to get his hands on the money for the charities and scholarships that my grandparents set up. That is what he wants. He wants to stop all the good words that we do and take the money for himself so he can spend it frivolous, like, I don't know, buy a stupid private jet. Thanks to those who offered serious advice and for scaring the hell out of me when I realized what he was actually planning to do. We found out that he was thinking by accident. Max overheard him when he was at a function for our school's charity, which he works for, and as I've said before, anyone who does not have a bank account with a heck of a lot of money in it is invisible to my parents, and most of their friends too. They're staff or people to be ordered about. Max said that his mother walked past him a number of times and did not even see him. Without me next to him, he was like a ghost, but that's how we found out that, well, what was coming up next. My father was talking to some of his friends who turn up to be, well, at every single charity gala in the city because it gets their face in the newspaper and it looks like they're kind, caring, and charitable people. They are not, and they only donate when they can make a big thing out of it and look like they give a crap about the, quote, normal folk. Sorry, I'm letting my crappy side out again. My dad was talking to a man who's a lawyer known for representing rich people, and getting them out of any trouble they inevitably get themselves into. My father was discussing how to get access to more money as the legal things put in place by my grandfather were strict, and my grandmother had full control. Max had lingered nearby listening in, and what he heard I'm still trying to process. My dad's friend said that the best way was to get my grandmother out of the way and get access to the legal side of the money. My father would then be able to shut down the charities and foundations and take over the money that is his. My dad had asked a lot of questions about how to, quote, get rid of grandmother, and there was a whole conversation about how healthy she was and complaining that she was not likely to die anytime soon. Max said that he was scared that we were going to suggest helping death out. But in the end, the lawyer said the easiest route was to have her put into an old age home, declared incompetent due to age, and get power of attorney. Apparently, there are doctors who, for the right money, will swear blind someone has dementia or something in court. Max could not stay there any longer, and given his apologies to his boss, came home to tell my grandmother and me the things that he heard. Now I'm writing it down, and yeah, it does seem ridiculous, but my stupid dad really was stupid enough to try this. Once we processed things, my grandmother shook her head and said that there was only one insane person in this family, and it was not her. She was upset that her own son had turned out the way he did. For the first time in my whole life, I saw her cry. She said that we had enough warning to fight back, and she would talk to her solicitor the following day. I wasn't sure what we could do, but there's no way I'm letting my father put Grandma in a nursing home and stopping all the good work my grandparents' charitable funds do. I went with my grandmother to see the family solicitor, and I think at first he thought that maybe my grandmother had actually lost her mind, as we told them what my dad was discussing. We had been dragging Max along as well, since he's the one who heard it. Well, the solicitor made Max tell him again and again and again what he heard, trying to make sure that he heard them correctly, but finally the solicitor seemed to believe us. He said that the problem was that it was hearsay and that it would be put down as just my father having a rant at a function while drunk. People did that all the time when they were mad at things, and surely we had all complained about people and wished that they would just go away. I sat there thinking, yeah, my parents. The solicitor said that they were really not much we could do as there's no immediate threat, and it's probably just my father letting off some steam. The solicitor had been with my family a long time, and I'm pretty sure he's almost as old as my grandmother, and he knew my dad. Apparently, all we could do was wait and see what happened, but he did suggest that my grandmother, there's an option. It could be to sign the control of the charities over to somebody else. Well, he did not say specifically, but those gray, bushy eyebrows were definitely wiggling in my direction and blatant hints. It would protect the charities even if my father tried to get power of attorney, but it was dependent on whether grandmother trusted anyone else, though. Nothing was concluded, but I could see my grandmother's brain working, as she was very quiet, which is very unusual. We got home, and to our surprise, my father was sitting on the porch waiting. My grandmother looked at him, and he said to us word for word, "Mother, I told you I was coming today. How could you have forgotten?" I've been sitting here for over an hour. My dad does not have a key to my grandmother's house because she doesn't trust him not to sell all her jewelry. My grandmother raised her eyebrow, which used to terrify me as a child because it meant that I messed up. And she said, "I think you must be the one who's getting forgetful, dear. I had an appointment planned with OP and Max for weeks this morning. Maybe you need to go see a doctor." It took all my willpower not to laugh, and my dad frowned but turned his attention to Max, asking why she was taking staff places. My grandmother looked back at Max and me and said, she apologized later for not asking us first and said, "Who, Max? Oh, he's not staff, he's your future son-in-law. Surely OP told you that. No? Oh dear, seems you're not as close to the family as you think you are." My grandmother is everything I want to be when I get older. My father was left there literally speechless, and I'm not sure what shocked him the most. That my grandmother was implying she knew what he was thinking, or that his only son was gay and had a boyfriend. He stared at me and, pushing himself to his feet, told me I was lowering myself getting together with staff, and went back to his car. I think in his mind, my dad slammed the door and sped off like in a film, but he has a driver, so it was nothing like that. My grandmother apologized to us and said she was not lying. She was waiting for us to get married before she's too old to be a bridesmaid. Chuckling, she said she needed to make some phone calls and disappeared into her office for the afternoon. I think I'm much less worried than I was when I first asked for advice, as my grandmother is a tough lady, and I think worried over nothing. So, thank you for reading this far, but unless anything happens, I think this will be the last update. If anything goes down, I'll probably add some more. Update number 2. Hey, it's nearly 3 months since I wrote the first part of this, and following my grandmother's confrontation with my father in the garden, things calmed down and life went on. Max and I formally moved in with my grandmother so that she, had backup in case my dad reappeared, but it's all been quiet. We barely saw my parents except at events where the family was expected to show their faces for the charities. Even then, my parents barely spoke to me, and my mom looked at me as though she had seen something that disgusted her. She was always a little homophobic when I was a kid, and I saw it in how she treated some of the people who worked at the house. And I guess it was part of the reason why I never came out to my parents. Now it's out, and Max and I are getting a lot of congratulations and quite a few people saying it's kind of obvious. Problems started around 4 weeks ago when in the early hours, a couple of police cars appeared with a social worker to do a welfare check on my grandmother. There had been an anonymous phone call saying she was wandering in her garden in her nightdress, confused and disoriented, and there were 2 boys living with her and who looked shifty. My grandmother shared at the police and said, "Well, I was disoriented now because you have just dragged me, my grandson and his partner out of bed in the middle of the night. I don't even own a nightdress. I'm a pajama type of girl." One of the younger policemen actually blushed, which was amusing. The social worker asked if they could look around, and my grandmother was like, "Sure, knock yourself out. If you go to the kitchen, put the kettle on while you're in there, sing We're All Up Now." One house check, a conversation to check, and we were not abusing the dear old lady, and 2 cups of tea later, the social worker left happy that my grandmother was fine. She looked over at us and said, "I wonder who could have called in the tip. I think we need to be more prepared for this." She was right. It was endless. My grandmother does not have a driver, and 3 times she was out in the car, and she was stopped to another anonymous tip, saying an old woman was driving erratically and was probably drunk driving. I was stopped twice and Max 4 times for the same thing. One night, Max was late at home from a night out with workmates, and the police turned up and tried to arrest him for breaking into the home, which his door had a key to. By this time, we were seeing the same police on more than one occasion, and finally, there was a knock on the door which we opened to show yet another policeman, but this time with a plainclothes officer. They asked if they could come in, and I actually sighed and said, "Sure. What have we been accused of this time?" Well, nothing, it turns out, but they have noticed that there seemed to be an occurrence of police reportings against us, and it had triggered I don't know, but something in their system, and they were coming to ask if we knew any reason this could be happening. My grandmother smiled and simply said, "Yeah, because of money." So, we go into detail about everything and said that we were pretty sure that my parents were behind it, and we explained about the plan that we had overheard to put my grandmother in a home. And we assumed this was just their way of trying to drive her insane. When we said it out loud, it all sounded just so stupid and petty, and it is. But people will do a lot of stupid stuff for money. The police said that they would be monitoring the calls now, as it was wasting police time and resources, and advised us to look at our options legally. My grandmother said it was all in hand and they left. I asked what she meant by that, but she said she would discuss it another time. Well, a week later, I found out that she meant when my parents arrived at the door screaming and shouting at her. Luckily, Max and I were home and we were able to make sure it did not get out of hand. My grandmother invited them in so the neighbors were not disturbed, but even inside you could probably hear the yelling 2 streets over. When my grandmother said it was all in her hands, she was not joking. That morning, the official documents have been served on my parents and they were being cut out from the family entirely. The house they live in was always in my grandfather's name, which passed to my grandmother. My parents never changed that, as they thought if they needed work doing it, it would be my grandmother's responsibility as she owned it, and would have to fork out the money to get the stuff done. Now she had served eviction papers on them to remove themselves from her property. Everything that was not in my parents' name was being taken back or signed over to me and Max, including the house. Oh boy, my dad was so angry. He called my grandmother names that no one should ever be called, then he turned on me and Max, saying we have obviously had a hand in this, and we're trying to get our hands on all the money for ourselves. I pointed out this was all a shock to me too. I had no idea what was going on. So, my grandmother said she had been planning on telling us once the papers were finalized, but my dad had reacted a lot quicker than expected. She laughed and said she should not have been surprised as all he cared about was money. My dad was screaming about going to court and all sorts of stuff, but my grandmother's a solicitor, is very good. And though my parents were being kicked from the family, they were still being provided for, and so he had no case. They were entitled to keep their clothes, jewelry, cars, and artwork, which was hideous anyways, and they would be provided with a smaller house in their name, which would be mortgage-free, but that they would have their own bills now. My grandmother would provide my father with a yearly payment in January for every year for the rest of his life. If he needs more money than that, he'd have to get a job like everyone else. Frankly, the amount of money she allowed him was more than I would have done, but she does not hate her son, just wants him to grow up. My dad was still yelling and then starts throwing things, so I told him to stop or I'm going to call the cops. He stormed off and got into his car, behind the wheel for once, and Max watched and quietly said I could smell alcohol. So we called the cops. He was pulled over before he reached home, and he was over the legal limit and now faces a drunk driving charge along with assaulting a police officer because he slapped the guy trying to put handcuffs on him. He was not used to being made responsible for his actions, and it was obvious. He will not suffer too much. His creepy lawyers will deal with it, I bet. Once he had left, my grandmother got all the documents that she had been working on since our first meeting with the lawyer. Everything had been signed over to me, and I was not sure if I even wanted it. It was too much. My grandmother smiled and said that she wanted to know that everything was being left in safe hands once she's gone. I cried so much because I can't even think of the day she'll be gone. So, I guess this story is kind of concluding in a positive way, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and my father will most likely try and tie us up in legal battles for years, because he will always want more, and if he can't have it, why should anybody else? My grandma does not seem to be worried, and she has arranged for me to have my own lawyer in the same firm as she is. She put Max's name as charity coordinator and on all the legal documents relating to the charity, and nothing can be done to those without his signature. He was so overwhelmed by this, and he could not understand why she was putting so much trust into him. I get it though, as he is one of the best people I have ever met. Well, I'm a bit late typing all this, and it's taken a lot out of me to put things together. Max and I are planning to get married in autumn, and as soon as my dad moves out of the house, we will be moving in. I'm hoping my grandmother will join us, as it's way too big for the both of us. I wanted to stop with the staff as it feels wrong, but then Max said that they rely on the jobs, and it's a better way to increase pay and treat them as humans and friends, not slaves, which we will do. Anyways, those who wish to leave will be free to do so with good references and a severance payment. Last week, it made the papers that my parents have been disowned by my grandmother, and so they're no longer being invited to the parties they were, as even though they're still well off, they're no longer super rich. And because they have not reduced spending, I think it'll be a long time before they're ever wealthy again. I heard that they had already sold 2 cars, and the artwork, as they're struggling with their repayments on things they have a credit on. I will not be helping out, and if they end up on the street, so be it. My parents need to learn that money can be fleeting, and if you treat people like crap, karma will come one day for you.
Well, I think this story ended on a positive note. The parents got disowned by Grandma and Grandpa, and they even made it to the newspaper. What do you guys think about this story? Let's discuss it in detail in the comment section down below. I'll tell you guys right now, the comment section of the original post was not happy with OP's mom and dad, they said, well, they were very ugly people. And they deserve much more than being cut off, but I'll leave it up to you guys. What do you think would be a better fitting punishment? Let me know your thoughts, guys. Thank you for joining me on today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more daily videos, it's super simple. Click that subscribe button with the bell notifications on, and you'll always get notified when I release a new video. By the way, I try to drop a video every single day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a fantastic day, and remember, it's cool to be kind.